Because I realized I didn't make them yesterday. Question 356. Okay, what is the third example of a bad mezek? A low neshama and a low guf. Okay, 357. A low neshama means there's not going to be inspiration. A low neshama means my neshama is not going to push me. My neshama, my spiritual side isn't spiritual. A person whose spiritual side is not spiritual, the neshama is not going to push him. 358. A low body means pushing a grub person. Grub. Coarse, crude, unrefined, gluttonous, indulgent, lustful. Right? You don't have to be a bad person. Just very, very involved in gashmias and not at all interested in ruchnias. When I was a teenager, my Elter Rebbe told me the story of the giraffe and the goat, where the giraffe is trying to describe to the goat how beautiful the world is, and the goat only sees the ground. And the giraffe says to the goat, you can see the sky, and you can see the clouds, and you can see the mountains, and you can see the little streams cascading down the mountains and joining into a larger stream. It's becoming a river at the bottom and it's flowing out into the ocean. And each minute the goat interrupts the giraffe and says, can you eat it? And the giraffe says, no, you can't eat it, but it's beautiful. And after a whole conversation, the goat has to break its neck to look up at the great sky, and it sees a beautiful world, and it says to the goat, I can't eat it. I can't eat it. That's a low guf. I can't eat it. If it's not basic and physical, not my thing. So you have a low neshama and a low guf. You have a low neshama and a low guf. So you have no motivation for the neshama, and your guf doesn't have the sensitivity that we talked about in the previous classes. Question 359. This combination means what practically? That it's very, very hard to have a chushan ruchnius, a chushan avodas Hashem. Because not mitzad the neshama, not mitzad the guf, you have a chush. You have no feel for anything spiritual. You have no feel for anything more meaningful. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to be a bad person, but you don't have a feel for higher inyonim. 360, can you think of any solutions? We offer two in class. What are they? A was bitl, to break the guf. A guy was a grab a guf. One thing about him is you can put him down. He's not going to fall to pieces. We have high gufs and low neshamas. A high guf is very sensitive. If you have a low guf, you can beat him up. Right? I quoted the Tanya chapter 29. He brings the Zoyar. A piece of wood that doesn't want to burn you, splinter. A guf that does not want to ignite in the fire of the neshama, you're mavatish. A person who has a low guf, you can beat him up without it. You're not going to hurt him because he's low. He's grub, and that may be a solution to somehow triggering something good. And B was Mesiris Nefesh. B was the idea that people with that kind of constitution, with a low guf and a low neshama, they probably don't do very well in the day-to-day lives. But they're the first ones to run into fire. The first ones to run into fire. In other words, like I told you in the class, God is the great experiment. When the Eibishter made such Yidden, He knows exactly who He created. He knows exactly who He created. And if He made people who have such ruchnias dike challenges, sai mitzad the guf, they have no chush. Sai mitzad the neshama, they have no esaydus. Right? What does the Eibishter want? These are Yidden who go on Mesiris Nefesh. These are Yidden who go on Mesiris Nefesh. And in 361, I gave you 3 stories to support. Okay, I'll let you write 360. 360A is bitush, beating up on the guf, and 360B was Mesiris Nefesh. And one of the Chavre mentioned, David mentioned, that I spoke about I should probably add it, the Mittel Rebbe. The Mittel Rebbe wrote Perek Ivrim. The Perek Ivrim was written for a real Baal Tshuva. A real Baal Tshuva. Not a Baal Tshuva who grew up not frum and then turned to Yiddishkeit. That's not a Baal Tshuva, that's a tzaddik. Because he's a Tinnish and Nishba Lebein right? A Baal Tshuva, he grew up from, went to yeshiva, learned from Daven, and then went away. That's bad. And about a real Baal Tshuva, somebody comes back from that. So the Mittel wrote a small little matter in Yiddish with instructions for the Baal Tshuva. And the instructions basically say 2 things, right? Never stop and hesitate. Move, gicha, do a lot of good deeds. And the other thing, which I guess is the Rebbe's mandate, is be happy. If a person has a low guf and a low neshama, he wants to get to life as a Jew, you have to just be so busy and not doing Avedas and be besimcha. We made that up, sort of, but okay, that's another solution. So again, doing 360, I'm changing it into A, B, and C. We offer 3. The first one is to break the guf. The second one is to be incredibly busy and be b'simcha. And the third one, which is what dominated yesterday's class, was the theme of Mesidus Nefesh. The idea of Mesidus Nefesh, of Allah, giving away achmaz on your life. Being busy, being busy. If 360 has A, B, and C, so C becomes Mesidus Nefesh, and B becomes being very busy and b'simcha. Just actions, good deeds, do. Okay? Shalom, you ready? Or are you making a picture?
No, I'm finishing the last part.
Okay, so tell me when you're ready.
Yeah.
361. For the third, I'm changing in a second into the third of these 3, we offered stories. What were they? So the first word was about the daya, and I stole the story incorrectly. I actually watched part of the class this morning. I was preparing these notes. The Rebbe RaShaB, the Gemara says he never missed a chance to do an Avoda. And a woman once told him about the Inyan HaTshuvah. I didn't look up the Gemara in Avoda Zarah, and he decided to do Tshuvah. So the story is very poignant. He wanted to get help with his Tshuvah. So he went to different forces. He went to the heaven, he went to the earth. Help me do Tshuvah. And everybody told him that if we're going to do Tshuvah, we're going to do Tshuvah for ourselves. Everybody told him, whoever he went, if I'm going to do Tshuvah, I'm going to do Tshuvah for myself. And Rebbe RaShaB made one of the most painful discoveries of all. The Tshuvah you do alone. Right? Just like you meet God alone. Tshuvah you do alone. It's a lonely business. No one's going to help you because they will get their own problems. The Middle Rebbe said, Svei nefesh l'kis avei nefesh abamis, but this is before the Middle Rebbe. He realized that no one's going to help him do Tshuvah because if they're going to do Tshuvah, they're going to do Tshuvah for themselves. So the Gemara says, he went between the mountains outside the city where he lived. Nosan reishe bein birkov and go b'chi. He put his head between his knees and he cried until he died. He cried until he died. And the Gemara says, a voice came out of heaven and said, Rebbe. The Rebbe, I heard this from the Rebbe. That the Gemara says, Rebbe RaShaB ben Derdaya ben Elma. Rebbe RaShaB ben Derdaya has the chelik in Elma. And then the Gemara concludes, Bocha Rebbe v'yamar Rabbeinu HaKadosh. The one who wrote the Mishnayos cried and he said, Yesh mi shekeni elama b'shah achas. It's possible to acquire your Elam Haba in 1 hour. And there's different opinions why Rebbe cried. Some people said that Rebbe cried tears of joy, that you could always do Tshuvah. And some people said he cried tears of protest. A person lives his whole life as a frum Hasidic Yid. Other guy lives like a goy, like a oizraf, like a who knows what, and in 1 minute they're the same Elam Haba. But that's what the Gemara says. Now, I want to just add one more thing that the Rebbe said, that I heard from the Rebbe myself, but it's in the Mugad Kesicher. I think it's Memches, that Rebbe RaShaB ben Derdaya died doing Tshuvah. But after him, another person can come and do the same Tshuvah that he did and not die. Because Rebbe RaShaB ben Derdaya was Pesach HaTzatzina. He was the first one to do Tshuvah mi'avarach. This kind of Tshuvah no one did before him. He brought into the world this concept of Tshuvah, which I'll bring in Tanya say Perek Mem Gimel, chapter 43 at the end. And now anybody can do this kind of Tshuvah without having to die. Okay, that's the first story. RaShaB ben Derdaya did every Avoda in the book. And somebody was made at him to Tshuvah. And someone was made at him to Tshuvah. And he decided to do Tshuvah. And first he asked for help, and he realized that no one's going to help him, and he realized that Tshuvah is a lonely business. So he went between the hills outside of his city, he put his head between his knees, and he cried until he died. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh said, Yesh mi shekeni elama b'shah achas. He cried, and he said you can acquire Elam Haba in an hour. And there's 2 different opinions why he cried. And of course the Rebbe's word, that after Rebbe RaShaB ben Derdaya, anybody could do that Tshuvah without dying. That's the answer to A of 361. B of 361, the story of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov used to teach his Talmidim different midas by sending them to observe different people. One day, the Baal Shem Tov told them to go to a certain city, and to go into a certain butcher shop, and at the back of the butcher shop, they're going to see a man cutting meat, and he'll teach them, Mezigas Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. So they went to the butcher shop, they went into the back, and they found a massive man, it was like 400 pounds, who was eating the fallings, the leftover meat that was falling off the cuttings raw. And they watched him for a day or 2, and they found nothing. Yeah, I'm repeating. It's a chazorah. Yeah. And they said, after watching him for a few days and seeing nothing except glutton, they asked him, So he told him the story that when he was a child, his father was murdered by a Poretz al Kiddush Hashem. He was a moshke, he was a bookkeeper, he was an accountant for a Poretz. The Poretz had a wild party and he wanted to embarrass him, and embarrass him in a way that involved Avoda Zarah. So he sent one shliach and a second shliach, and he wouldn't come, and the Poretz was very drunk. And the Poretz said that if he doesn't come to the party, he's going to burn it. He hid in the silo. Hey, he's going to put the silo on fire, and he did, and his father died. He said, my father was such a small little guy, he burned up in 2 seconds. If anybody's going to burn me because I'm Jewish, I'm going to burn for a long time. That's what he said. It's a very painful story. But the people with the low Neshamos and the low gufas, this is their excellent expertise. This is where they shine above all other Yidden. I'm saying this because it's hard to understand how a Jew like this is supposed to be Jewish. Maybe she gave him every disadvantage. A low Neshama, no inspiration. A low guf, no chush ruchnius, no sensitivity. What does Rebbe RaShaB want from him? He's crude. He's crude. He has no sensitivity. B'chalal, there's a rule. I mean, this is a conversation for another time. Tanya chapter 2, Tanya chapter 18. The Neshama and the guf don't come from the same place. The guf you get from your parents. The levushim. The Neshama you get from the Eibishter. Now, usually they match up, but not necessarily. Sometimes, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Neshamos, Nishmas Adam Gaveili Ein Kate, Boli is B'nei Adam Nivze V'Shaf. It's possible the biggest Rasha should have a child, the big tzaddik. I mean, in Tanakh, there's a guy named Ochos. Ochos was such a big Rasha that his own father exhumed his grave and he dragged his body to the street. His own son exhumed his grave and he grabbed his body to the street. Ochos is the son of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, one of the greatest tzaddikim. And Chizkiyahu HaMelech's son was Menashe Mechso, was a bigger Rasha than Ochos. So you could have whatever kind of goof and levushim you get from your parents, but the Neshama Hashem gives. You can't do nothing about it. Okay, now the third story, the story of the Alter Rebbe, which is the continuation of the story. I heard the story from Rabbi Mangel Shlitos, and then later I saw it in the book. Father Khan brings the story by Kitzer, that there was a Chassidish boy. I remember how he told the story, and I'm assuming that's how he heard it from Rabbi Gringlas, from his mashpia. There was a Chassidish boy who grew up in a Chassidish home, in a Chassidish shtetl, went to Chassidish malamda, but he was a prodigy, he was a genius. And he very quickly grew out of all of his teachers. His father was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. I don't know why his father didn't bring him to the Alter Rebbe, but he became very bored. And he realized at a certain point that everybody around him is dumb and he's the only smart guy. And he became very, very arrogant. And then he found mathematics. And he became a great mathematician. He left his shtetl, he left Russia, he moved to Vienna, he became a big mathematician and he published books. And years later, he decided to visit his parents as an adult, to visit his family. So when he came to visit them, his father asked him if he would go see the Alter Rebbe. So he said, I'm not interested in what your primitive life is, but I'll go meet the Alter Rebbe al Tzchochem, because Alter Rebbe was famous for being an expert in Chochmas Chitzenius. So when he went to Alter Rebbe took us 2 Sfarim, and he leafed through them like a picture book, based on 1 page at a time. And every once in a while, he made a fold. He finished 1 book, he pushed it aside, took a second book, did the same thing. He leafed through each page, and when he finished, he pushed the 2 books across the table, and he said to this genius, every page I made a fold is a mistake. He was so angry, because he was so sure that the Alter Rebbe doesn't know what he's talking. I mean, the Alter Rebbe didn't read it even, he just looked at it. So he walked out, and right away they grabbed him for the Yechidus Tanz. They wouldn't let him go, which infuriated him more. Finally, he ran into the Beis HaMedrash and he sat down, very, very frustrated. He realized the Alter Rebbe is as big a fool as his Chassidim, and by some whim, he opened up the first fold, and he found a mistake. So he went crazy. He looked at the second fold, and every page with a fold was a mistake. So now he was mishtoimim for the Alter Rebbe's genius. How could a person at a glance see in a book of abstract mathematics, see such mistakes? So he ran into the Alter Rebbe, and the Meshadas wouldn't let him in. Yechidus is only once, it's very sacred. So he stood by the door screaming and fighting with the Meshadas, and the Meshadas not letting him in, and he Pachuk started to cry. When he started crying, the Alter Rebbe opened the door. And he sat with Alter Rebbe a long time. And the Alter Rebbe said that anytime he comes, they should let him in. And for the next 7 weeks, I saw 2 gifts. One gift was he came once a week. Another gift he came 49 times every day. And he sat with Alter Rebbe a long time, and then he vanished. Never saw him again. The Mittler Rebbe asked the Alter Rebbe what this was. And the Alter Rebbe said this was the Neshama of Elazar ben Dodaya. And he comes back again and again, and each time they put him into the most holy and Jewish environment, most from Yiddish possible environment, and each time he fries out and becomes an animal. This was his last Gilgul, the Alter Rebbe said. And so the Alter Rebbe said these words: I had Mesiras Nefesh to inspire him to come to me. I had Mesiras Nefesh to inspire him to open the book to see the mistakes. In other words, Alter Rebbe had to some Gepoil. I had Mesiras Nefesh to make by him my Seirus, you want to come back into me? Because I wanted to bring him to Tshuva. That's the third story that I told you yesterday. Those are stories, the stories of Mesiras Nefesh. The stories of Mesiras Nefesh. If a person has a low Neshama and a low guf, so solution number one is Mavachem Lei, like it says in Tanya Perek of Tez. Beat him up, break him. Solution number two is one we added now, is like it says Makei. Don't stop, just be busy doing good deeds. Do. And the Rebbe would add Mitach Simcha. And number three, Dinyan Mesiras Nefesh. Those are the answers to 360. And in 361 we had the three stories. Are we ready to move on? Question 362. What does the Rebbe RaShaB say about our generation? Now boys, I actually carry this around. It's not the kind of thing you tell people. This is my meditation. This is my meditation. But I do it in the Rebbe RaShaB, which is much longer than the Rebbe. The Rebbe has a few lines in each Meziga. The Rebbe has a whole Perek in each Meziga. So this is, on this page, the Rebbe RaShaB says, Achshav Bizman, I'm reading inside. I am based on the old print page, Tov Reish Tez Zayin. Achshav Bizman, Ikvis Mashiach, and Neshamos Shveilas mit Yesa Acharin. He says, even the Rebbes, the Tzadikim, have low Neshamos, V'gam HaGufim V'chaykim Yesa. The Rebbe RaShaB says both the soul is low and the body is low, which means we're like messed up. Now, so in question 362, what does the Rebbe RaShaB say about our generation? The Rebbe RaShaB says about our generation that we have low Neshamos and low Gufis, which means we're really messed up. 363 is really what we're going to be learning now. It's a precursor to today's Shia. What does the Rebbe say differently? The Rebbe says differently because we have low Neshamas, we were given high Gufis. The Rebbe says. We're going to read it inside momentarily. Neshamis, Nemuches b'Yes, and Neshamas bechinas akvayim, Hagufim b'daket yoyes at Aidel. I personally believe, I really believe it, but it's not based on anything. I believe the issues with self-esteem, the issues with anxiety, the issues with depression, which are incredibly widespread in our generation, is what the Rebbe means when he says Hashem gave us very, very pure gufis. We're very sensitive. The neshama is very low, but the guf is very sensitive. That's the only reason we stay from. If we had low neshamas and low gufis, it would be worse than it is, if you can imagine that. So again, the Rebbe RaShaB says, 362, that our generation have both low neshamas and low gufis. The Rebbe says we have low neshamas, but we have high gufis, very sensitive gufis. I told this to a lady student of mine, and she repeated it to a very, very important Lubavitcher Chassid and said, there's no way the Rebbe said that. I showed him inside. No way the Rebbe said that we have Aidel gufis. And it says, you're going to see it in a moment inside. Okay, so you got 360 and 363. It's very important. You shouldn't only get it on paper, you should get it over here. The Rebbe RaShaB says, Ida guf, Ida neshama is low, and because the Mashiach, and of course one of you told me probably correctly, the Rebbe RaShaB was 100 years ago. So the definitions of low were different. So he says, side the neshama is low, side the guf. He says, neshama is of the Rabbeim. He says, neshama is of Rosh Hador is low neshamas. So he says, Rosh Hador, he was talking about himself. Rosh Hador neshamas. Let me tell you how I say, shtickle politics for the morning. The Rebbe RaShaB had a bacher, I told you stories about him before, who was very close to him. He lived in the house, and he was the Rav in the house for a while. His name was Yankov Lando, Harav Yankov Lando. He was a Bnei Brak Rav for many, he passed away in 1940, say 84, he was Rav of Bnei Brak for many decades. He was a Chabad Chassid, he was a big Talmud Chacham, a big Lamda, a big God. Harav Yankov Lando was very close to the Rebbe RaShaB. He's the guy I told you the other day about, that he went to the Rebbe RaShaB scene and he has to die and be buried within 50 days. And the Rebbe Rayat told him, the Tatar gesagt and schreiben kann the same Yankov Lando. So Yankov Lando was talking to the Rebbe RaShaB, and the Rebbe RaShaB said to him, today there's no Neshamos of Atzilus. And I actually wrote it on the margin of my mirror. There's no Neshamos of Atzilus. And Yankov Lando was a big chassid. And the Yankel Lando's mind, the Rebbe himself, the Rebbe RaShaB was the Neshama d'Atzilus. So the Rebbe RaShaB says to Yankel Lando, Heinz and the door Neshama d'Atzilus, there is no Neshama d'Atzilus. So Yankel Lando says to the Rebbe RaShaB, aber Rebbe Heinz and the d'Atzilus. He couldn't take it that the Rebbe said that he's not Neshama d'Atzilus. He said, Rebbe, but today there's also Neshama d'Atzilus. So the Rebbe said, in Atzilus is done Madregas. In Atzilus there's levels. The Rebbe RaShaB had a Shabbos meal. Always had 10 people sitting at the table, and he always benched with a cuss. But he didn't always bench himself, he would give it the benching out. Yankov Lando sat by the Rebbe RaShab's table, but he was a young boy, the Bacher. The Rebbe RaShab never gave him the cuss to bench. That Shabbos, after they had that conversation, where the Rebbe RaShaB said what he writes in this mind here, that now there's no Neshamos of Atzilus, and Yankel Lando corrected him and said, the Rebbe aber Heinz and Eidel Neshamos of Atzilus, meaning the Rebbe himself. And the Rebbe responded by saying, in Atzilus and Adom Madregas. So that meal, the Rebbe RaShaB gave Yankel Lando the bench. And Yankel Lando writes, I think the reason he gave me the bench was for thanking me for my arguing with him about that issue. I just want you to know, Yankel Lando did not write stories. Why do we have stories from Yankel Lando? The Rebbe asked him to write to him. Yankel Lando used to write stories to our Rebbe. He never called him Admur. He was the chassid of the Rebbe RaShaB till the day he died. He used to write El Kved Kedushas Shlita. He would write to the Rebbe. And they're now printed in the back of Shmuz V'Sipurim Chelakav, the second print. And as a kid, I had the manuscripts, the Yeshribene, and I regret throwing them away because I'm afraid some of it was not printed. But when the book came out, I threw them out. I used to have copies, folders and folders of pages, all the stuff that you couldn't get, I used to copy. And then they would print them. When they printed them, I threw the copies away. I didn't need them. So that's one of the stories there that the Rebbe RaShaB said there's no more Neshamos of Atzilus. He said it over 100 years ago. The Rebbe RaShaB passed away 102 years ago. And Yankel Lando said to the Rebbe RaShaB, but the Rebbe today there's still Neshamos of Atzilus. So the Rebbe said to him, in Atzilus there's levels. And in that meal, he gave him the bench of a kos, and he said there was a yasher koyach. Bottom line is the Rebbe RaShaB says that in our generations we have low Neshamos and low gufes. 363, what does the Rebbe say differently? We have low Neshamos, but high gufes. And I agree with whoever said it yesterday that our Neshamos are lower than the Neshamos of the Rebbe RaShab's low Neshamos, and therefore we have to have Aidel gufes. I believe that all of our anxiety, all of our fears, all of our sensitivity is the basis for our spirituality. Because the world in which we live, I was in the Bats Bakery yesterday, and I stood in the stickers room. I mean, this is hard for you to understand. When I was a child, we used to stand and rub the sticks with sandpaper. So if you were very religious and you didn't want to use the same stick twice, you would have 8 or 10 men standing in 2 rows, 5 standing on the bench, 5 standing on the floor, sanding each other it was a house of latonas, Now you have a machine, one person feeds it in, one person feeds it out. And I met as a child, we called it the Stickers Union. I remember as a kid, it was Stickers Union. So I was in the stick room, and there was a kid, a boy downstairs, an 11th grader. He doesn't look like an 11th grader, he looks like he's pure. And I look outside, this Bochum, 11th grade, Mesivta boys already start, you can see the cell phone on them. The 9th graders still look pure, but by the time the 11th grade, they're achem. But they look beautiful. They push up, they look beautiful. So I tried to engage this boy in conversation about the cell phone and the Neshamos. He really wasn't interested in talking to me about anything. I was talking about the moon, he wasn't interested in anything. He's not a talker. His father wasn't a talker either. His father looked at me. Midnight again today. But I said, well, you guys have a possible test. I said, yeah. You get a cell phone, you're finished. I said, you get a smartphone, you're done. And he pulls his dumb phone out of his pocket and he shows it to me. The Neshamos that the boys have today, I have to tell you, you're better than I. And you should avoid them. Yeah, but so how if you don't avoid them? The only thing that keeps us Jewish is what the Rebbe says, we have very fine gufes. I argue that these fine gufes are the source of all kinds of even mental illnesses that keep us focused on important things instead of becoming total brutes, total behemoths. If we had the temperament of 19th century people, we would be so shakua and tired, we'd get drunk, we'd make ourselves sick. Our Neshama is very low. The Neshamos are incredible, but our bodies are very sensitive, and that sensitivity brings us back always to considering a life of greater meaning. It's my opinion. That's how I'm interpreting. I told it to you once before what the Rebbe says in the Bible, which we're going to learn in a moment. Now, 364. How is this helpful? When you have a Aidel group that's very sensitive, you cannot insult a person today, period. Nobody can take an insult. No one can take the slightest criticism. Now, Yom said, one of the greatest midas a person can have is appreciating constructive criticism. We're not gaming for it. Nobody can take criticism. I can't take criticism. So the right to I have to give it to somebody else. We're very, very sensitive. That sensitivity is my interpretation of what the Rebbe means. And I think it keeps us through in the end. Boys, it's 9 o'clock already. I want to read it. I'm going to finish the paragraph. Okay? Go to your text. Page Shas. Page Shin Sama. Five lines from the end it says, Meziga du nasas no maila. The blend, the mix of Neshama and Guf, Hashem makes. Now, of course, the Rebbe RaShaB's whole shaila is, what if Hashem gives me a bad blend? What am I supposed to do? Look at the words. Meziga du nasas no maila. The blend, the mix of my Neshama and my Guf, Hashem gives me. And what if Hashem gives me a bad blend? What am I supposed to do? And the Rebbe RaShaB offers eitzes. If you have a very, very, very low guf, you beat him up. You have a very high guf, you misameach him. There's all different kinds of solutions. But the Rebbe says, Hashem makes the mix of the Neshama and the guf. And he gives an example. He says exactly the opposite. The Rebbe is based. This mime is based on this mime, and I'm holding two in my hand. Yeah, this is the Rebbe RaShaB's mime from Kiteitzei, I think. From Kiteitzei Tafeshayin Dal. This is the source of this. Okay, but in this one Perek, but in this one paragraph, which starts the second half of Shem Toshin Samach, over here it's literally 8 pages. The Rebbe offers, the Rebbe RaShaB has 2 or 3 pages on each Meziga bilti Nechuna. The Rebbe has 6 or 7 lines on each Meziga bilti Nechuna. The Rebbe consolidates, which makes it easier for us to not get confused. But the Rebbe disagrees with the Rebbe RaShaB. The Rebbe RaShaB says in our generations we have a low Neshama and a low guf, and he says, Shemei, for example, the Ikvus Nemshich, our generation, the Hila Mashiach, Neshamos and Nemuchas Be'ez, the souls are very low. Why are the souls low? Because the Eibush ran out of high souls. The high souls already live. And we're Gilgulim, with like the trace, bottom of the barrel Neshamos. They need to finish up what the Rebbe calls always the Pachim Ktanim, the small little jugs. Says the Rebbe, Neshamos, the Bechinas Nakvayim, souls at the level of heels. Azai Hagufim, Hemedakas, Yeter. We have incredibly pure bodies. And the Rebbe says, Nidish Aidel. The soul and the body should be able to be. Which allows for the magic word. The magic word is that it shouldn't be automatic. It's got to be work. If you're good, serves Hashem, and you're not working on yourself, then you're not serving Hashem. It's got to be hard. And what's the hard, as Kennedy said? The Neshama comes down and the guf goes up. And the Neshama encourages the guf to do the work, and the guf does the work. So when you have a very low Neshama, you need a very Aidel guf for the Neshama and the guf to meet and to actually do work. To join the work of the soul with the body, to affect in each one of them, the opposite of his nature, canals, which is the beginning of this Perek, which is a huge base. That the Neshama's job is to go down, which is against its nature, and the guf's job is to go up, which is against its nature. So I just read the last 5 lines, but the questions I already gave you. Questions 362, 3 and 4 are today's shikl. Right? What kind of Hashem makes the mezig? Maybe I'll add a question or 2 more for next week Monday. What Hashem makes the mezig? Hashem makes the blend. And how did He make our blend? That because we have low neshamas, we have very high gufas. Questions or comments? You're supposed to say, wow, amazing, exciting, I never thought about it, very interesting. Okay, maybe Taka be a Sid Shiyid. No comment. Hey, David Shleim, I love you. Okay, the Rambam writes, Mashiach is David HaMelech. And in Pirush HaMishnayos he writes, Mi Beis David, Mi Zer Shleim. Mashiach is not enough David, it has to be David Shleim.